All right, let's get started. Did you know that the Feast of Shavuot, also known as Pentecost by the pagans, has been celebrated every year, beginning with the children of Yisrael, the year that they were freed from Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, for the uninitiated. Did you know that the Sepharim Shelechim, which is called the New Testament by the pagans, letters, the NT letters, tell us that there were no Goim, no Gentiles present with the Talmudim, that be called disciples by the pagans, when the Holy Torah, the holiness of spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Torah, was poured out on the day of Shavuot. Did you know that when God gave the children of Yisrael the Torah at Mount Sinai, the people could see the voices of God, and his words looked like dancing fire? Did you know that Yehezkel, called Ezekiel by the pagans, saw the day of Shavuot spoken about in the letter of Maasim, called the letter of Acts by the, you get the idea, in a vision. Yeah, he saw it in a vision. Did you know that the same Yehezkel or Hezkel, his description in Ivrit or Hebrew is almost, I should say, an exact match to the description found in the Greek text of the letter of Maasim. In other words, the description that Ezekiel gave in his Hebrew account of his dream is almost identical to the account given in the Greek New Testament. Maybe you don't know that because the English translations of these two verses don't even sound alike. Basically, the Feast of Shavuot is the celebration of the giving of the Torah. That's what they call the infilling of the Holy Spirit. The name of this message is Shavuot 2018. It is 2018, right? Okay, please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scriptures. In honor of the day of Shavuot, I'm going to read, by the way, in case you guys somehow don't know this, I'm wired and tucked in with wires and whatnot. I can't stand. It's not a law given by God to stand and to cover your head, but it is a tradition. And for any potential Christian that may be watching, Yeshua and his Talmudim, that be Jesus and his disciples, did this when the scriptures were read, when prayers were given. Yes, they prayed standing up. They did not pray, well, sometimes some of them prayed on their knees, but in public they prayed standing up, and they did not put their hands together. They put their hands up, and they did not bow their head. They put their head up. The reason why Christians do it is because Constantine told them to get rid of all things Jewish. And so the way they did that was, since the Jews did this, the Christians do this. So basically, virtually everything in Christianity is the opposite of what the Jews do. And you say, well, that's okay. We don't like the Jews anyway. Well, but what the Jews did was based on the Bible. Just saying. Anyway, in honor of the day of Shavuot, I'm going to read my translation of the 10 suggestions. The 10 devarim, which is the Hebrew word for words. You could think of them as categories. The 10 categories that are incorrectly known to the English-speaking world as the 10 commandments. They are categories, not individual commandments. Besides, try to go in there and read this passage and see if you don't find 13 or 14 of them. I'm just saying. The first one, in English, of course, you shall not have other gods in my presence. God said that in Exodus. That's the way the Gentiles know it. It's Shemot, chapter 20, verse 3. The second one is, of course, going to continue on in Shemot. You shall not make for yourselves 3D images of any form that is in the skies above, and that is in the earth beneath, and that is in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, and he gives his name, Yahweh, your God, am a zealous, not jealous, but zealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth. We usually put generation in there so people will know what he's talking about, because in Hebrew you don't have to say that. To the third and the fourth, to those who love me. That's not what it says, is it? To those who hate him. The iniquity is visited on the generations to those who hate him. Why? Because he's punishing them, because he's being mean to them, because he don't like them? No. Because if you raise your children showing disdain for God, what are your children going to do? They're going to grow up showing disdain for God. And what do their children do? They're going to grow up showing disdain for God. So the ones who hate God, the ones who show disdain, the ones who don't live according to his commandments, because what did he say? If you love me, you'll do what? Forsake my commandments and live by grace? No, he said, if you love me, you'll live by my commandments, right? So those who love him, maybe this will happen, maybe it won't, right? Why do I say it that way? Well, because if you don't teach them in the way they ought to go, they probably won't go that way. I'm just saying. All right, so it goes on and it says, and showering mercy to the thousands that hate me. No, to the thousands that love me and do what? This is in the 10 Commandments, and keep my 613 laws. That's what the meats vote are. To the Gentiles, Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. That's right there. There you have it. The law of God is to be kept according to the so-called 10 Commandments. So for those who say they are keeping the 10 Commandments and are not keeping the 613 laws, they are lying to man, and more importantly, they are lying to God. Maybe it's through ignorance, but you can still lie through ignorance. I'm just saying. In ignorance, I don't mean you're stupid. I mean that you don't know something. I'm not a stupid person, but I'm very ignorant of certain things in this world because I have no interest in them. Just saying. The third one, you shall not lift up the authority of Yahweh your God in vanity, for Yahweh will not hold guiltless those who lift up his authority in vanity. You're like, Rob, you can't say God's name. Oh my Lord, I gotta get out of here. This guy's a pagan. What is the authority of God? What is his name? It's the Torah, in case you don't know. But if you take God's name, if you say, no, it's not, it's his name, it's his God's name. Okay, because, all right, I'm with you. So if God saw to it that his name shows up almost 8,000 times in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, in what the pagans call the Old Testament, if it shows up almost 8,000 times, and knowing that we only have half of what was written by the prophets and whatnot, probably it would have shown up 16,000 times. And what do? We say, no, let's never say God's name. Let's erase it from history. We're going to put Hashem in there. And we're going to say Adonai, Hashem, the name. What have you done? You've taken God's name, his actual name, in vain. So don't do that. Now to the Christians, Romans chapter 7, verse 1, are you negligent, brothers? For I speak to the doctors of the Torah. It says those who know the Torah. Who are those who know the Torah? The doctors. How the Torah has dominion over the lives of every man. Every man, not just the Jews, but every man, for 15 minutes, an hour or so. It says for all eternity. every man. The Torah is over every man for all eternities. That people is in the New Testament. Just saying. The fourth one. Remember the Shabbat. The Sabbath is what the pagans call it. The Shabbat. Remember that day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall serve and do all your occupational work. But the seventh day is the Shabbat to Yahweh. It's his. It's for him. Your God. If he's your God, this is for him. So if you're not doing it, if you're not keeping it holy, then maybe you're okay because it's not your God, right? But if it's your God, he's telling you to keep it holy. Oh, I don't have to go to church. I don't have to go to synagogue. I can worship God just fine while I'm fishing. Yeah, right. We all know better than that. You go fishing, you're turning on the classic rock, you're smoking a cigar, and you're doing this. And you ain't worshiping God. Give me a break. I'm just saying. At least that's how I picture people going fishing. Anywho, it says, but the seventh day is the Shabbat. So you have 6 days you can do all this stuff that you want to do or that you have to do. 6 days. But the seventh day, which by the way, the seventh day is not Sunday. Sunday is now and has always been the first day. So the seventh day is Shabbat, also known by the pagans as Saturday. But the seventh day is the Shabbat to Yahweh our God. You shall not do any of your occupations. You, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servants, nor your maid servants, nor your cattle, nor your strangers within your gates. And that means under your authority. So if you own a company, you cannot make your people go run your company while you're Shabbating. Can I say Shabbating? For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. And on the seventh day, that'd be Shabbat, Saturday, he rested. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and made it holy. There you have it. Absolute proof in the 10 Commandments that we are to keep the Sabbath on Saturday. The first day of the week is Sunday. Now here's the fifth one. Honor your father and your mother so that your days will be long upon the earth that Yahweh your God gives to you. If you don't honor your parents, if you don't take care of them, if you don't listen to them, if you don't obey them, all of your days will not be long. They give good advice, you should listen. The sixth one, do not commit murder. It is pretty simple. It doesn't say don't kill. It says don't commit murder. Because didn't the Jews have to fight wars and people died? Yes. That's still happening, right? Had supposedly 50,000 people rush or more than 50,000, but all these people rushed well, this isn't the supposed part. There was a whole bunch of Palestinians that were hired by the Hamas to go rush the fence, and the purpose was to go get past the fence and kill as many people on the other side as they could. That was the idea. That's what they were being paid for. And so when they rushed the fence, supposedly 50,000 people were killed. Well, here's what's weird. They only had 2 funerals, and they were closed casket. I don't think there was anything in those caskets. And then they said, oh, look, they killed this little baby. And they show you this baby that looks like it's just asleep. You don't know if it's asleep or dead. But they say they killed this baby. And by the way, why wasn't there a funeral for it? And if there's 50,000 people dead, what do? Dig a hole and just throw them all in there? Why wasn't that all over the news? If they'd done that, that would have been all over the news. But how come if 50,000 people were killed, there's not 50,000 funerals going on over there? They only had the 2, and those were closed casket. I'm just saying. So don't commit murder. Well, protecting your border is not murder. It's self-defense. And everybody ought to know that if they have half a brain. Half a brain. Number 8, do not steal. Do not steal. Do you know in Hebrew that means don't lie? Because what are you stealing if you lie to somebody? You're stealing the truth. There's all kinds of forms of stealing. Do not afflict your friends with lies. What happens in Hebrew when you say the same thing in two different ways? Come on, people, stop your lying. And number 10, do not covet your friend's house. Do not covet your friend's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maid servant, nor his ox, nor his he-donkey, nor anything that is your friend's. All right, so please remain standing. Huh? What do you mean number 7? I skipped number 7? Mm-hmm. Oh, do not commit adultery. Hey, if I'd forgotten that altogether, which I did, but if somebody hadn't told me about it, would that mean it was okay for you to commit adultery this year? Just saying. You know what adultery is, right? Just saying. We'll jump that. All right, so 10 was don't covet your friend's house, his wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey. Does that mean that you can covet the other stuff that wasn't listed? No, these are examples, and they say a bunch of different things because they're trying to make it important and kind of give you an idea of what coveting is and what you shouldn't be doing. And they're saying basically don't covet anything that belongs to somebody else. All right, so here we go. Yehezkel, called Ezekiel by the pagans. Someone's going to have to add a drum roll or something there. All right, so here's what it says. Va'ere ve'hine ruach se'ara ba'a min ha'zafon anan gadol ve'esh mitla kachat ve'noga lo saviv umitacha ke'ein ha'chashmal mitoch ha'esh. Then verse 18, Bechol ha'am roim et hakolot ve'et halapidim ve'et kol hashofar. You know what that is? Ve'et hahar hashen vayar ha'am hayanu vayamdu me rachok. And finally, Vayikra, which is called Leviticus by the Anyway, 23:15 through 21 in English. And you shall count to you from the day after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Shabbatot, which is Shabbat in plural, by the way, shall be complete. So 7 times. Anyway, even from the day after the 7th Shabbat shall you number 50 days. You get there's the math. And you shall offer a new meat offering to Yahweh. You shall bring out of your habitations, out of your own place of dwelling. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits. They are the first fruits. So the first fruits are not the corn you picked out of the field with a blanket so that nobody could touch it. Are you following me? So some traditions developed that had nothing to do with the reality, right? But this bread, that's the first fruits to Yahweh. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs without blemish of the first year, and 1 young bullock and 2 rams. Wait, lambs and rams. They shall be for a burnt offering to Yahweh, with their meat offering and their drink offerings, even an offering made by fire of sweet savor to Yahweh. Okay. By the way, all of this is for the whole of Israel. So we don't have to actually do all of that, right? Because the way you know how much to do generally is by how many people are eating. But this is the sacrifice that is for all of Israel. So you're not going to get that much, right? I hope you understand. Verse 19, then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats for a Torah rebellion offering. That's a sin offering. And 2 lambs of the first year for a sacrifice of peace offerings. That means that it's going to make everything right between you and God. And the Cohen, that's the priest, shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits. So it's going to be a pretty big basket, right? For a wave offering before Yahweh with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to Yahweh for the children of Israel. Nope. For the pagans? Nope. For the Cohen, for the priest, the one who's actually doing it. It's in singular, not plural. Could you imagine having to hold up a basket with all those lambs and whatnots in them? It's probably not the whole thing, right? Just saying. You shall proclaim on the selfsame day that it may be a holy assembly to you. You shall do no servile work therein. It shall be a statute for 15 minutes. No? Until the temple's destroyed, until there's no temple priest. No, forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. All right, you may be seated. I'm getting the feeling that I'm in. Y'all getting that too? So in this Ezekiel's dream, this is chapter 1, verse 4. We're starting off with Ba'ere, which is, and I looked, because he's looking in the dream, right? So it's to see. Oh, look what I see. You get it? You know what to look is. Vehine, and behold, I looked, and behold, man. Got it? Ruach. That's the word for spirit, for breath. The breath that comes out of the mouth. Not some supernatural thing, right? In my case, it's just breath that's coming in and going out. That's what they mean by that. The spirit, sa'ara, the spirit like a whirlwind. Man, that wind was blowing, people. This is ba'a. So it came mean, which is from ha-zafon. It came from the north. A whirly wind that came from the north. Did I miss a word? No. Anan. And that's the word for cloud. Gadol. So it's a great cloud, a humongous cloud. The esh. Sounds like fire. A great cloud of fire. Meet la kahat. It kind of goes along with the idea of the whirlwind. It's like the wind is folding in on itself and twisting and turning. You got that? Venoga. And something was shiny, something was splendorous. And this is low, and this is that sound alike, because this is to it, saviv. It was blowing all around it. Umito ha. And in the midst of it, ke'ain. That's as I. So it's singular as an eye. Hashmal of amber, so it was an amber color. Mitoch, and that's from the middle. Ha'esh, from the middle of the fire. Well, you would think that there'd be an amber color coming from the middle of the fire. All right, so here's his translation, or my translation of what he said. And in his presence, and in the joy of his light, my eyes lingered on the vision, and behold, the violently shaking storm, because it's pulling in on itself, it's swirling about, right? The violently shaking storm, rushing spirit. Remember, ruach, it was rushing, entered from out of the heaven, northern heavens, a great veiling cloud. Of course, I'm using all the different words that they use to describe it, right? So I'm overdoing this. And a raging, fiery passion, because the fire, when you're speaking of a person, becomes passion, right? So we got this raging, fiery passion that's joined to it. Why? Because we got to assume it's the Spirit of God. And the splendor, remember that, something shiny? Like the brilliance of the rising sun, raised brightly like a fire all around it. And from out of the middle, it looked like polished brass from out of the middle of a raging, fiery passion. Here's a literal translation of Shavuot 2018. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. Now consider a translation of this same verse, done in the same style as our last verse. So I'm going to overdo it, take every word they used to describe each individual word, and make this long-winded baloney type. Anyway, so remember, we're on Shavuot 2018. And in his presence, and in the joy of his light, all the people's eyes lingered on the sight of the thunderous voice and the dancing flames of fire and the thunderous voice of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When all the people's eyes lingered on it for a while, standing in his presence and in the joy of his light, they ran like schoolgirls to and fro. Well, the schoolgirls part probably wasn't there. To and fro in sheer terror and resisted it, thrusting themselves far away. Hopefully it all makes sense here in a little bit. I like to share with you guys at least once a year something that I found written in this thing called the Torah Club. I don't know if they're still around or if they've given their soul to the devil. You know, I have no idea, but this is something from way back, and I think it's a good tie into all this. They wrote in one of their articles called The Voice of Fire. They say in Exodus 19 and 20, God steps down onto Mount Sinai, which is why I said passion, because this is about God stepping onto the mountain. He speaks the 10 commandments in the hearing of all the people. In other words, so that they can all hear him. At the end of the narrative, we read literally, and all the people saw the voices of the torches. We would normally smooth out the Hebrew of verse 18 by translating the word say as heard, right? The word say is now heard. And by translating the word torches is now translated lightning. Thus, we can paraphrase, and all the people heard the thunder and saw the lightning. The Hebrew text of Exodus 20:18 does not actually use the word thunder. Instead of thunder, the word kolot, which you may have heard me say that when I was reading it in Hebrew. Kolot is employed. Kolot is the plural form of the Hebrew kol. As explained above, kol means voice. So the Torah literally says, and all the people saw the voices. The sages, however, read the passage literally. Of course they do. Without our glasses, that helps. Based upon their literal reading of the Hebrew, the people saw voices and torches. What does it mean? The people saw voices. How does one see a sound? How does one see a voice? Where did the torches come from? What are they? In Deuteronomy, Moses, remember, I'm still reading the thing from them. I wouldn't say it that way. I would have said Moshe. Retells the story of hearing God's voice at Sinai. In 10 different passages, he reminds Israel that they heard God's voice. So 10 different times it says it, and that is correct. I looked to make sure. So they heard God's voice speak to them from out of the fire. Repeatedly, he says, you all heard the voice speaking from out of the fire. Regarding the fiery voice of God, the disciples of Rabbi Ishmael applied a verse from Jeremiah. The verse says, is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, in all caps, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces. How is God's word like a fire? How is his word like a hammer? In explaining this verse, the disciples of Rabbi Ishmael vividly imagined God's voice at Mount Sinai to be like a sledgehammer breaking up large stones. With each successive blow, a multitude of fiery sparks are scattered in every direction. The school of Rabbi Ishmael taught that the verse, and like a hammer that breaks a rock in pieces, means that just as a hammer is divided into many sparks, so too every single word that went forth from the Holy One, blessed be he, at Sinai, of course, split up into 70 languages. And they're basing that on B Shabbat 88b. According to their reading, the voice of God at Mount Sinai not only split into 70 voices speaking 70 different tongues, but those voices like hot sparks flying forth from a hammer's blow on stone. Is not his word like fire? The sages of the Midrash thought so. According to their interpretation of Exodus 20:18, all the people really did see the voice of God. And torches too, because the voice of God appeared to them like hot, burning torches. As he spoke, his words took shape as torches of fire. Consider the following passage from the Midrash says, an anthology of such legends. On the occasion of the giving of the Torah, the children of Israel not only heard the Lord's voice, but actually saw the sound waves as they emerged from the Lord's mouth. They visualized them as a fiery substance. Each commandment that left the Lord's mouth traveled around the entire camp and then came back to every Jew individually. There are some of the stories, these are some of the stories of Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, the Lord told Israel, if you will hear my voice, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Israel not only heard the voice of God at Mount Sinai, they heard it in every language. They saw it too. His voice came to them as fire. Now let's look at something from the Sepharim Shelachim. Specifically, let's look at Ma'asim, which is called Acts, chapter 2, verses 1 through 15. It has something to do with this, I'm just saying. It says, verse 1, this is my translation of the Greek. And when the day of Shavuot drew near, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there was a sound from heaven as a driving violent wind. And it filled the Heichal, it filled the temple where they were sitting. This is, of course, a remez to, from the west, they shall reverence the name of Yahweh. And from the east, his glory. The violent wind of Yahweh will drive on. That's, of course, Yeshayahu 59:19, also known as Isaiah. Verse 3, and they saw their portion of languages as flames, and it set down on each of them. Does this sound like something a Greek philosopher would write? Just throwing it out there. All right, and then I have here as a side, and all the people saw the voices in the flames, and the sound of the shofar, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood far away. That's, of course, Shavuot 20:18 that we just looked at in depth. When the children of Israel experienced the day of Shavuot at Sinai, it happened just after their exodus from the bondage of Mitzrayim, the bondage of Egypt. Here in the second chapter of Ma'asim, we read about the exodus of the children of Israel from the four corners of the earth, which is also called the ingathering of his people. Verse 4, and all being fulfilled with the Holy Torah, the Holy Spirit, also began to speak languages other than Hebrew, as they declared what the Torah, what the Spirit had given them. And there were dwelling at Yerushalayim, which is what they called it at the time. They call it Yerushalayim now, but it was called Yerushalayim back then. All dwelling in Yerushalayim, Yehudim. That's the word for Jews, isn't it? I'm just saying. Then it says devout. That means Torah observant. They were dwelling Torah observant Jews. And it says men out of every nation under heaven. Every nation under heaven. Okay, so they had the Greeks, and they had the Romans, and they had the Chinese, and they had the Japanese, and they had the Americans who didn't exist yet, and they had the Italians. If Jews are writing about every nation under heaven, what are they talking about? The 12 tribes of Yisrael. And so now it says Gentiles. Mostly Gentiles. Some Gentiles. One or two Gentiles? No, it didn't say that. Yehudim, Jews, devout men, Torah observant men, out of every nation under heaven. Every nation under heaven are the 12 tribes of Yisrael. All 12 tribes of Yisrael from every nation on earth were gathered together in one place on the same day. The 12 tribes were no longer scattered. That's what these men who were there said. Actual witnesses to the event, people who were there when it took place, said that somebody from each of the 12 tribes was there. Verse 6. And when the sound of this came to the people, remember that rushing sound and all that, they were confounded because everyone heard them speak in his idiot language. And the translators had no idea why they called everybody idiots. You read the New Testament in Greek and it's idios this and idios that, idiotai, what's with the idiot? Well, when they said idiot language, they meant a language that wasn't Hebrew, because the only non-idiot language to the Jewish world was Hebrew. Anything other than Hebrew was called an idiot language. For the Yehudim of the biblical period, any language other than Hebrew was crude, vulgar, unrefined, thus idiot. Verse 7, and they were amazed and marveled, saying, behold, are not all these which speak Galilean? Aren't they Galileans? No, but that's what they said. Verse 8. And how can everyone hear in the non-Hebrew, the idiot language of our birthplaces? How is this possible? Because what most people don't know is that if you went to a synagogue in this time period, you went to a place where they spoke everything in Hebrew. If you went to the temple, everything was in Hebrew. And did you know that most of the Jews in this area didn't speak Hebrew? So they go and they're just like, okay, everyone's getting up, let's get up. Okay, everyone's worshiping now, let's worship. Okay, I don't know what else going on, I don't understand. And now for the first time in the Jewish experience, the word of God, the Torah, is being preached in their idiot language. Verse 9. Ravon, that's the Parthians. In other words, the Jews from Parthia, or Ravon. And Madai, the Medes. Now, these are not the people that are the Medes. These are the Jews, which technically are Medes because that's where they're from. But remember, it said nothing but Jews. Remember, there were nothing but Jews here. Why would the Gentiles go to the temple on the day of Shavuot? Why? But it says there's got a Gentile court. Yeah, the Gentile court was for the Jews who didn't speak Hebrew. Why do you think it was so much bigger than the little bitty? Anyway. All right, so it's the Medes, the Elamites, and the dwellers of Avram, which is Mesopotamia, and in Judea and Cappadocia. The Hebrew would have been easier. Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, Libya, Cyrene, Rome. And then it goes, are you getting it? All of the places where the 12 tribes went. Judea. Anywho, then verse 11 says, Yehudim, Jews, and Gerim. Do you realize that's the word for proseluto? Proselytes. What are proselytes? There are people who are converting to Judaism. Proselytes. Proseluto. Proselytes. Converts. So you either had Jews or people converting to Judaism. That's all you had to choose from. Then they said, oh yeah, and there was the Besarim, they were the Cretes, they were the Arabians. Wow, that's cool. Some actual Arabs were doing this. We hear them speak in our languages the mighty works of God. We hear them speak in our languages the mighty works of God. Wait a minute. I thought they all saying, I tell you, tell me, I'm a bow tie, I'm a Shundai, I want to buy a Hyundai. No, it wasn't gibberish. No, it wasn't some language that couldn't be understood. By this time, Hebrew was the language that couldn't be understood. They hear what they're saying. hear them speak in our languages the mighty works of God. What would that be? The Torah. They're teaching the Torah in a language other than Hebrew. This was earth-shattering. But it's a remez to, and it will come to pass in that day, the Lord will set his hand again a second time. The new sacrifice, Jeremiah 31 through 34, or Yirmiyahu as it should be, to recover the remnant of his people, which remain from Ashur, there's Asia, Mizraim, there's Egypt, Patros, there's Pathros, however you say that. Cush is Ethiopia. Elam, Shinar, that's Babylonia. Hamath, Hamat is the Hebrew word. And the coastal islands of the sea. Of course, from Yeshayahu or Isaiah 11:11, right? So what are they doing? They're telling you. Isaiah saw it. He said it was going to happen. He said it was going to be a rushing, mighty, fiery wind, and the Spirit of God would be poured out. And here we have all of those very same places, some of which the names have changed by now, being pointed out. Yeshayahu, they call him Isaiah, chapter 11, verse 11, spoke about the day this would happen. Ma'asim, or Acts chapter 2, verse 9, well, 9 through 11, tells us that this was the day that it happened. So these people who were there said, oh, wow, the end of days came. This proves beyond any reasonable doubt that the two-house teaching is absolutely, completely, and utterly false. The ingathering of the remnant has already taken place. It is not happening now. Also, we've just been told that there were no Gentiles, like we think of Gentiles. There were Gentiles. Those are Jews that don't speak Hebrew. That's what the New Testament called Gentiles. They were not talking about non-Jews. Jews did not write about non-Jews. They wrote about the Jewish experience. But it told us there weren't any there. There was no one there but devout, or to observe it, Jews and proselytes, people who were converting to Judaism. Those are the only people that were on that mountain that day, the Temple Mount. What happens when he is a proselyte while becoming Jew? To be a Jew is to live according to the Torah. Judaism is a religion, not a line. So the only people present in that place on that day were the 12 tribes, formerly scattered trial, and their gathered lights. 12. And they were all amazed and confused, saying one to another, what is this? But others mocking, saying, they are filled with new wine. But Kepha, that's the guy they know as Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said to them, men of Yehuda! Because that's who was there, remember? All those little places all over Yehuda. Though I think it's funny that they added Babylonia to it. But, you know, a lot of them stayed there after the exile was over, and so some of them had come on that day. Men of Yehuda, and all who dwell in Jerusalem, because he didn't say Jerusalem, but, or be it known to you, and listen to my words. For these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only the third hour of the day. You've got to be kidding, man. This is the smoking gun, by the way. Be on the day of Shavuot, at the third hour of the day, they would be in the Hehal. They'd be in the temple. Now let's take one more look at verses 2 through 4, translated in the same manner as our earlier verses. That's what I call it. Acts chapter 2. And suddenly, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, there came to exist the thunderous voice of the violently shaking, crushing, stormy, rushing Spirit entered in from the vast and infinite heavens. And it filled the hall in the place where they were all sitting with an overflowing abundance. And in his presence and in the joy of his light, people's eyes lingered on the sight of the portion of language that appeared like a raging, fiery passion resting on each of them. And they were filled with an overflowing abundance of the Holy Torah. And in different languages, they began setting and arranging their words in a proper order as the Torah came to rest, raining down on them like sweet honey. The Torah was given at Sinai 50 days after Pesach, after the Yehudim, after the Jews were released from captivity in Mitzrayim, and was written on tables of stone. Then the Torah was once again given 50 days after the sacrifice of the ultimate Pesach lamb, but this time it was to be placed on the mind and written on the heart. When God first moved into the secret place, which was the Holy of Holies, as it's called these days, in the Ohel, in the tent, and eventually the Hall, the temple, his presence was experienced by precious few. When the fire came down on Shavuot, the presence of God sat down on the mercy seat of their tongues, because his Torah was written deep inside the secret place in their hearts. Not ours, but theirs. You see, they were trained in the Torah. They were ready to go out and reach the rest of the Yehudit or Jewish world with the good news that God had reconciled his covenant with his people at the cross. The Torah is not written on our hearts and minds through the process of osmosis. Or by some secret knowledge given to us by the infilling of the third person of a pagan trinity, which was never spoken or written about until after the time of Jerome in the late 300s CE. God's law is written on our hearts and minds after we have learned it, and we have come to love God enough to live it out in our day-to-day lives. Those who are touched by the fiery passion of God's Torah are forever changed. As the fiery passion touched the 120 who were there that day, they spoke proper words, arranged in a very specific order, not because God was dictating what they should say, but because they were fully trained rabbim, or rabbis, and it was time to spread the good news of what is now called the gospel. But the good news, what is the gospel? It means that God has reestablished his covenant with his people. As they preached this good news, well, how good would that? I mean, that's what you've been waiting for, right? There's no better news. As they preached this good news, the gospel was like a fiery passion dancing on their tongues. The Feast of Shavuot has always been a celebration of the giving of God's Torah. The event that the Torah, the evidence, I should say, that the Torah is in our hearts and written on our minds is our obedience to it. Not our disobedience to it, not our living by grace, our obedience to it. That's the evidence. If we love God with all our heart, soul, and strength, we will not serve other gods. We will not have graven images. We will not have take his name in vain. We will remember to keep the Shabbat day holy. We will honor our father and mother. We will not commit murder. We will not commit adultery. We will not steal things. We will not bear false witness. We will not covet our neighbor's house and his stuff. If we see our neighbor in need, we will help him, even if it means we have to pull a big old ox out of the ditch. Why? Because we are filled with God's passion, and that's what his Torah has always done to those who are filled with it. And now, because Mashiach restored God's covenant with the Yehudim, with the Jews, the Goyim, they call those the Gentiles, can experience that which the Yehudim, and that's why it's so important for us to understand what they meant when they said Goyim. They're talking about the ones who didn't speak language. And if you're a proselyte, if you're trying to live according to God's law, you have now actually become a Goyim. That's okay. That's a proselyte. You're in the conversion process. That's good. But that's why they can experience that which the Yehudim once had and lost, but now have forever. Will you accept the fiery passion of God here, right now? Will you let God fill you with the Holy Torah? If so, reach up and receive God's fiery passion today. Shalom, b'shalom, y'all.